New Year's Day should have been a fresh start, a day filled with hope and new beginnings. Instead, it became a series of eerie, almost unreal events that left me questioning everything about my home, my memory, and even my safety. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. A soda can exploded out of nowhere, narrowly missing my carotid artery, but scraping my neck enough to leave a stinging reminder of how close I'd come to something worse. That alone would have been unsettling, but it didn't stop there. Later that day, I was thrown off my bed. I wasn't dreaming, and I wasn't half asleep. It was as if something invisible grabbed me and yanked me onto the floor with enough force to bruise my right leg. The landing spot? Exactly where I'd seen a shadowy figure earlier that morning. It's a memory burned into my mind, that dark, human-like shape lingering near the edge of my bed. And then, as if that wasn't enough, there were the claw marks. Strange, deep scratches on my wall that had no explanation. I was showing them to my grandma and family over FaceTime when the bed incident happened. The marks, the way I was abruptly pulled, and even how the phone flew out of my hand like something had knocked it away. My sister later told me it looked like I was being dragged, which sent a fresh wave of unease coursing through me. The rest of the day spiraled from there. By evening, I was struck by an intense stomachache. I hadn't eaten much the day before. My medication tends to kill my appetite, so I had no idea where this violent bout of diarrhea came from. I couldn't even crawl to grab my phone, let alone call for help. I was drenched in sweat, dehydrated, and utterly helpless. It was the first time I truly thought I might die in this house. In sheer desperation, I forced myself to drink tap water, enough to muster the strength to crawl upstairs to the bathroom, where I finally collapsed. What made it worse was my decision to avoid my bedroom. After what had happened earlier, I couldn't bring myself to sleep there. I'd set up a makeshift sleeping area in the living room, thinking it would be safer. But my stomachache forced me to go upstairs, right back to the area I was trying so hard to avoid. The next morning, I woke up sore and shaken, nursing my bruised leg. My sister called, and her words stayed with me. "It really looked like something pulled you." That lingering thought pushed me to dig into the house's history. Something wasn't right here, and I needed to know what. And then, a memory came flooding back. A memory I hadn't been able to piece together for over 2 years. I bought this house in August 2022. At first, I was excited, fixing it up and getting ready to move in. But in September, everything changed. I was rear-ended in a car accident on my way back from this house. The crash left me with a traumatic brain injury, memory loss, and long-term concussion symptoms. That missing memory? It hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just leaving my house that day. I was running from it. I remembered standing in the main bedroom, looking into the mirror, and seeing a shadowy figure by my waist. It was the same spot where I'd been thrown from the bed recently. I fled the house in sheer terror and ended up in that car accident later that day. It's like the house didn't want me to leave unscathed. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. I pulled the property records and discovered that one of the original owners had died here around New Year's in 1991. He was in his 30s, and according to neighbors, his wife lived in the house until 2018. After that, a woman with 3 kids moved in, but they sold the house to me in 2022. It felt like the house had been waiting for its next victim. Since then, my life has been a constant battle. I've had more accidents, tripping, falling, bruising my legs and arms in ways I can't explain. I've tried everything to cleanse the space, burning sage, salting the property's boundaries, even setting up protective symbols, but none of it works. If anything, it seems to make whatever is here angrier. One particularly terrifying night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps above me. Clear, deliberate footsteps pacing back and forth in the bedroom I refused to sleep in. I held my breath, listening as they moved closer to the stairs. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination, but when I finally worked up the courage to check, the room was empty. Yet the atmosphere was wrong, cold and oppressive, like I wasn't alone. Another time, I found dead birds in my backyard. Not just 1 or 2, but several, all lying in a strange formation near the back door. It was as if something wanted to send me a message, but I didn't know what it was. Time doesn't feel normal here either. I'll sit down to do something simple, like sorting through papers, and suddenly hours have passed. The bedroom is the worst. It feels like time stops entirely when I'm in there, trapping me in a strange, disorienting limbo. I'm 28, single, and living alone. My job keeps me busy, but it doesn't leave much room for dealing with this nightmare. My parents refuse to help, and I don't have a support system in town. Every time I try to make progress, whether it's tidying the house or preparing it for sale, something happens to set me back. I feel trapped, like the house doesn't want me to leave, but staying here feels like a slow death. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm scared, exhausted, and completely alone. This house, it's not just a place I live. It's something else entirely, and I'm terrified of what it wants from me. This happened a few years ago, but it still lingers in my mind like it happened yesterday. I never thought I'd have a story like this to tell, but here we are. It was a cool, misty evening, the kind that makes you want to bundle up in a sweater and savor the changing season. The sky was fading into a soft gray as dusk crept in, and we were driving back from my mother-in-law's house. My then-wife sat in the passenger seat, and my 3 teenage daughters were in the back seat, chatting and scrolling through their phones, as kids do. The drive was uneventful, just another quiet trip home. Or so I thought. The road we were on wasn't particularly busy. It was one of those smaller country roads where you can drive for miles without passing another car. It had been raining lightly, just enough to leave a sheen on the asphalt and a faint mist in the air. The kind of evening where the world feels a little muted. Like everything's been softened at the edges. It was peaceful in a way, but also a bit eerie when I think back on it now. We were approaching a railroad crossing, and even though it had crossguards, I've always made it a habit to slow down and check both ways. It's one of those cautious habits you develop over time, even when the road seems deserted. As we got closer, I instinctively glanced to my right, just as I always do. And that's when I saw her. At first, I wasn't even sure what I was looking at. About 30 feet down the tracks, there was a figure standing right in the middle of the rails. It caught me so off guard that I did a double take, my brain scrambling to make sense of it. I expected her to disappear the moment I blinked, but no, she was there, clear as day, a young woman standing perfectly still. She had long, dark, wavy hair that fell past her shoulders, and she was wearing this long, white dress. It wasn't modern by any stretch, more like something you'd see in an old photograph. The dress had long sleeves, and there was a hood or veil draped over her head, framing her face in a way that felt almost deliberate. She wasn't facing me directly, but her head was tilted slightly forward, her eyes peering up at us. Her expression was neutral, neither happy nor sad, just completely still, like she was studying us. The image was so vivid, so out of place, that it sent a shiver down my spine. And then, just like that, she was gone. I blinked, and the tracks were empty. I remember gripping the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing. Was it the rain? A trick of the light? Maybe a reflection on the window? I tried to rationalize it, convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something real. For a moment, I thought I might have imagined it. But then, from the back seat, my youngest daughter spoke up. She was 16 at the time and had been quiet for most of the drive. Her voice broke through the silence. Did anyone else see someone standing on the tracks? My stomach dropped. I hadn't said a word about what I saw. I glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to keep my voice calm as I asked her to describe what she saw. And her answer stopped me cold. She described the exact same woman I had seen. The dress, the veil, the way she was standing. It was uncanny. No one else in the car saw her, just the two of us. My wife and older daughters thought we were imagining things, maybe feeding off each other's nerves, but I knew what I'd seen, and hearing my daughter describe it with such precision only confirmed it for me. Later that night, after we got home, I couldn't get the image out of my head. I'm an artist, and sometimes the best way to process something is to sketch it out. So I grabbed my sketch pad and started drawing. I didn't say anything to my daughter about what I was doing, didn't even hint at it. When I was done, I held up the sketch and asked her what she thought. The moment she saw it, her face went pale. She screamed and ran out of the room. I've never seen her react like that before. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. She knew exactly what she was looking at because it was exactly what she had seen too. Over the years, I've thought about that night countless times. I've tried to find a logical explanation, something that would put my mind at ease. Maybe it was the weather, the way the rain distorted the light. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me and hers was just feeding off my reaction. But deep down, I don't think that's it. The memory is too vivid, too real. And the fact that we both saw the same thing, that's what keeps me up at night. I've wondered who she was, why she was there. Was she tied to the railroad somehow? Did something happen to her there? Or was it just some strange coincidence that we happened to see her that night? I'll probably never know. All I know is that it's a moment that will stay with me forever. Working as a night shift nurse is unlike anything else. The hospital at night has this strange energy, quiet, still, but never truly restful. The hum of machines, the distant sound of footsteps, and the occasional creak of a door all blend into a symphony of subtle unease. My job is to care for patients nearing the end of their lives, making sure they're comfortable, clean, and at peace. It's heavy work, but there's something deeply meaningful about being part of someone's final chapter. Last night started like any other. I was caring for an elderly man whose condition had been declining steadily. He was in his final hours, and I could tell just by the way his breathing had slowed. Long pauses between each breath, like his body was gradually letting go. It's hard to predict exactly when someone will pass, but after years of experience, you learn to recognize the signs. After turning him with my tech, I decided to call his family. It was around 1 a.m. and I hesitated before dialing. Waking someone in the middle of the night to share news like this is never easy. Still, they had a right to know. The phone rang twice before going to voicemail. I left a message, apologizing for the late hour and explaining the situation, then gave them my number to call back if needed. By 3 a.m., his breathing had slowed even more. Each breath was labored, with long, drawn-out pauses. It was clear he didn't have much time left. I called the family again. No answer. Another voicemail. I couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Maybe they were too exhausted to pick up, or maybe they were dreading the call they knew would eventually come. At 5 a.m., I decided to sit with him. It felt important to be there, to bear witness to his final moments. I set up my mobile computer and began charting while keeping an ear on his breathing. The room felt heavy, like the air was thick with something unseen. I've felt this kind of atmosphere before, a mix of anticipation and stillness that often comes just before a patient passes. When the breathing stopped, it was almost imperceptible. One moment, the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. The next, silence. I performed a quick assessment to confirm what I already knew. He was gone. There was a peacefulness to his expression, a stillness that made me hope his passing had been gentle. My tech and I prepared his body for the family, moving quietly in the dim light of the room. I called the family again at 6 a.m., and this time someone answered. I explained what had happened and encouraged them to come if they wanted to say their final goodbyes. 2 family members arrived shortly after, their faces a mix of grief and exhaustion. I led them to the room, stepped out, and closed the door behind me to give them privacy. As I sat at the nursing station, trying to finish my paperwork, a faint chill ran down my spine. The hallway felt different, colder somehow, and unusually silent. I chalked it up to my imagination, a side effect of exhaustion from a long shift. Then came the banging. It was loud, jarring, and unmistakably coming from the deceased patient's room. My heart raced as I hurried down the hallway, my footsteps echoing in the quiet. Reaching the door, I called out, asking if everything was okay. When I tried the handle, it wouldn't move. Hospital doors don't lock. They're designed to be simple, no complicated mechanisms, no chance of getting stuck. But this door felt solid, immovable, as if something was holding it in place. From inside, I heard panicked voices. The door won't open. I pressed harder, throwing my weight against the handle, but it didn't budge. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. This door had been working perfectly all night. What was different now? As I stood there, I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise. The air around me felt charged, like the static before a storm. And then, faintly, I heard it. Breathing. It wasn't coming from the other side of the door. It was right behind me. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, but I couldn't move. The breathing was slow, deliberate, and eerily similar to the labored breaths of the patient just hours before. Gathering every ounce of courage, I turned my head, expecting to see something. But there was nothing. Just the empty hallway stretching into the dim distance. Snapping out of my paralysis, I called engineering. They arrived quickly and worked to remove the door from its frame. The family members stumbled out, pale and shaken, muttering about how the air in the room had felt suffocating, heavy, like they weren't alone. As I guided them to the waiting area, one of the family members hesitated, glancing back at the room. "Did you see anyone else in there?" they asked, their voice trembling. I didn't answer. When I returned to the room later to clean up, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The air was still cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. And on the wall near the bed, just above where the patient had been lying, I noticed something that hadn't been there before. Faint streaks, almost like handprints, trailing down toward the floor. I left the room quickly, my pulse racing, and didn't look back. By the time I clocked out, the sun was rising, casting long shadows across the parking lot. As I drove home, I couldn't stop thinking about the breathing, the door, the handprints. Some things in this job are beyond explanation. Maybe it was the patient's spirit, lingering for one last moment with his family. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something I'd rather not understand. All I know is that the hospital at night is a place where the line between the living and the dead feels thinner than anywhere else.